welcome to this Intelligent Briefing. My name is Alex Presley. I'm the editor of Intelligent CISO, and in this deep dive series we talk to Andrew Rose, the resident CISO of EMEA at Proofpoint, who tells us why the working from home economy is accelerating an overdue shift to people-centric security, and offers his advice to CISOs looking to adopt this approach. I hope you enjoy. Hi Andrew, thank you for joining me today. I'm Alex, I'm the editor of Intelligent CISO, and today we're going to be discussing the cyber threat landscape. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi Alex, well thanks for talking to me today. My name is Andrew Rose, I'm the resident CISO at Proofpoint. I've previously been a CISO at many organisations, including several law firms, UK air traffic control, and then a major subsidiary of MasterCard in the UK as well.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So if you'd just like to start by giving us an overview of the current cyber threat landscape.
So the threat landscape is really interesting at the moment. I think technology is really effective. You know, a lot of CISOs have invested a lot of money in all these technology controls and firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and that's actually really pretty effective, despite the fact they require a lot of sort of maintenance and upgrades and looking after. But actually what that's done is that's changed the way that criminals now look at organizations, and they look at organizations in a different way. You know, the criminals are there to try and create money for themselves. And so they're always looking for the simplest and quickest way to do that. So actually what we're seeing now is a fundamental shift and a focus on social engineering. Social engineering is the major attack vector these days. Almost 100% of cyber attacks require the user to do something, some human interaction, for it to be successful. So attacks are increasingly targeting people, not the technology or the infrastructure. And things like cloud is intensifying that trend. Now CISOs rightly worry about attacks such as ransomware, but they need to worry about the other aspects as well, financial fraud via email, because attackers are looking at the people now. That's the major focus rather than technology.
What cyber risks do you think have been introduced or heightened through this mass migration to remote working?
Yeah, you're right. Cloud has been rapidly adopted. I think as many organizations have decided to adopt the social distancing that's been pushed upon them and send people home to work. It's changed the ways of working, and organizations have had to look at how can we enable people to collaborate, how can we get people to work perhaps from their home PCs. So cloud adoption has been very rapid. Yeah. And people just aren't quite used to what that means yet. So if Office 365 has been pushed on them quite quickly, or Teams or different collaboration tools, people are quite adept at picking them up and starting to use them, but they're not quite sure of the details. So if you click on a document in an email and want to open it in PowerPoint in Office 365, if that asks you for your login credentials, is that unusual or is that expected? I'm not quite sure. You know, and people haven't been through the full training for all these different cloud services that are now being pushed on them. And so that gives the criminal an opportunity to do some credential phishing and steal some credentials and put some malicious applications in the way of the users, because they're not really 100% sure about how these cloud systems should work. So that's not helped. And then you've got the fact that lots of people are using their home kit rather than corporate kit. Perhaps organizations don't have a laptop for every user. They're used to going into the office and using a desktop. And now they're using their own PC at home, and perhaps that lacks some of the top tier corporate security that they would have had in the office. So there's that piece. And then I think the final piece is the fact that remote working takes away your human support network. So previously, if you had something that was a little suspicious that arrived at your desktop, you could just turn to your neighbor next door and go, have you received this? What do you think about this email? This looks a bit suspicious to me. But now everybody's working in their own offices, or their own offices at home. You don't have that ability. And so people just go, well, I'll just click on it then. I guess it probably is fine. Yeah. And so actually putting people in their little distinct silos has actually given the criminals a distinct advantage. And the adoption of cloud technology means that people are not quite used to the way that things work. And again, the advantage goes to the attacker at that point.
Can you highlight any trends you've seen relating to BEC and EAC attacks?
Well, at Proofpoint, we cover more than just the business email compromise and the email account compromise, which I'll come back to in a second. We see email as the major attack vector. I think 94% of all security attacks come through the email channel, and Proofpoint is focused on how we protect that channel and take away the majority of those attacks from an organization. And we'll come back to other things. But business email compromise, that's where effectively an attacker will send you an email saying, oh, please pay this invoice, and they'll send it from outside your organization. EAC is email account compromise. That's where they actually steal the credentials, log into the email system, and then send effectively a legitimate email claiming, please pay this invoice. And actually, CISOs are aware of this, and they're concerned about this as a threat. But actually, I think it's more of a threat than many CISOs think it is, because the barrier to entry for an attacker is really low. They don't need much technology to do this. They don't need much insight. They don't need to know how to hack the latest firewall or have a zero-day exploit that they can use. They just have to be able to send emails. And the overall success rate is relatively high. So it becomes an appealing attack vector. Mm-hmm. It's also probably not widely reported. You don't get all that many stories in the press about this. It is possible for an attacker to commit crime and keep it at quite a low level, which keeps it out of the press and keeps it off the radar of law enforcement, but actually still make a relatively good living. So probably what we're seeing is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of threat. But overall, it is a big concern, because actually a huge amount of money can be stolen through these email compromise attacks. I think Gartner said that the threat from this vector is going to double every 2 years.
Yeah, I read that figure, yeah.
So it's going up to sort of billions of dollars a year. I think it's 5 billion from next year, I think they said. And the FBI did some analysis to say that actually the loss from these type of email compromises over the past 3 years has added up to $26 billion. And again, you're thinking this is a huge amount of money that's being stolen. And are we only seeing the tip of the iceberg? Are we seeing lots of small frauds that are going through that we're just not seeing? So it is a big threat that CISOs need to be more focused on. CISOs do focus on ransomware and on those immediate big threats that could wipe out the organization. But actually, this is a very prevalent threat, which is actually stealing money from your organization much more directly. So CISOs do need to start sort of focusing on this. And there are a couple of ways that these attacks happen. So they will attack you through sort of payroll diversion. That's one way. So effectively, they'll write to your HR department and go, Alex, I'm Alex, and I've just changed my bank details. Here are my new bank details. Please pay my salary to this bank instead. And HR may do that, and suddenly they've stolen your salary for the month. Or gift card scams where they write in and go, I'm the CEO and I want to give everybody a present this week, so I want to send everybody an Apple gift card. Please go and buy $10,000 worth of Apple gift cards and send me the numbers. And people fall for that. And then there's the simple ones where they just send you an invoice. And the invoice comes in and says, please pay this invoice. And that can be relatively easy to detect if it's just coming from a Gmail account. But actually, if they've stolen the account as well, and it's coming from a trusted supplier's email account, it's very difficult to spot. Very difficult to spot that suddenly they're telling you to change the account and pay it to this account instead. It can be difficult for an individual in the organization to spot that and highlight it. So it is a big deal. It's a bigger deal than perhaps I thought it was before I joined Proofpoint. But now seeing the data and the evidence, it's a worry that CISOs really need to sort of be on the front foot with.
And from a business perspective, what would you say is the impact on financial loss and brand reputation?
I mean, I mentioned earlier about the $26 billion lost. So organizations can lose a substantial amount of money. I think there were two major US internet companies who you would know of, and they lost $100 million to this sort of fraud. It's huge amounts of money. And it's not always, you don't just send an invoice in saying, please pay me $100 million. It'd be good if that was that easy. But actually, the constant drip feed of the small frauds that can go through and actually be paid. And when you go back and track them through, you can see that you've paid a great deal of money to fraudsters. So you can lose quite a significant amount of money. But if you think of the reputational side, that also becomes quite a concern. If you're a supplier and suddenly you contact the person, your customer, and you say, you haven't paid us for this invoice yet, they come back and say, well, we have paid you and here's the evidence. We sent you this, but you told us to pay it into this account instead. That puts you in a really difficult position because, if a legitimate email has come from your organization to say, oh, don't pay us, pay this account instead, what do you do with the customer then? Do you say, well, hang on, pay us again? Or yeah, sorry, our security is rubbish, but can you now pay us the money, please? It puts you in a really difficult situation. How do you do that? How do you have that conversation? And I've actually experienced this as a CISO. I went through this. And because we liked the vendor and we want to do more business with them, we agreed on a 50-50 split. But it wasn't the greatest conversation on earth to be having. And so if you think about the reputation of your organization, especially as a third-party supplier, you have to be really careful that you don't disenfranchise the customer and really annoy them by asking for money that they think they've already paid, at the same time as admitting that your security is not very good. So it's a difficult one from both financial loss and reputation.
Gartner predicts that these types of attacks will double each year. So how are you working with customers directly to manage these and tackle these types of attacks?
It's a never-ending arms race, really. We work with our customers in multiple ways, but as I mentioned earlier, email is the vehicle for these attacks. And within Proofpoint, we focus on email security. And so we apply different machine learning and artificial intelligences to make sure that actually the ever-changing attacks that come through to our customers, we can pick them up and we can stop them getting through to users. We know that users can be susceptible to paying these and following the instructions of the attacker. So we try and help them by just stopping those attacks getting there in the first place. And we can use things like DMARC to stop fake emails being sent from certain domains too. So we look to prevent the source of the attack actually getting through to the user. But then we also supplement that with security awareness training. And we make sure that all of the users within our customer organizations receive the training to recognize these attacks and know what to do with them, how to highlight them and how to get them pulled immediately from other people's email accounts so other people don't fall for the same trick. But it's a tricky one because the attackers keep on moving the goalposts and they keep on moving forward. So we have to as well.
How is the move to cloud intensifying the trend of social engineering attacks?
Social engineering, it's not just cloud, actually, Alex. It's you think about the perfect storm we've got going on now. So people are moving to cloud, but from a social engineering perspective, you've got things like COVID happening and all the social anxiety that comes with that. So the financial pressures and the job insecurity. So there's lots of techniques an attacker can use to send an email through. An example would be, we've just noticed that you are in the vicinity of someone who has COVID. Please click here to validate that this was you. And many people will just go, oh my God, and click on it straight away without thinking. The attacker's got the great advantage right now of being able to create those emotional situations where people will switch off logic and immediately open the attachment because they're worried. So the whole piece that's going on right now with social distancing and COVID is really giving the attackers a really clear way in. And we're seeing that the amount of attacks that are coming through via email that have pivoted onto the COVID message was just off the scale. Straight away it became the most popular attack topic. No more UPS packages being delivered, no more Nigerian princes, no more anything of that. It was just like, let's get on the COVID bandwagon. And so we saw a huge amount of COVID topics being talked about. But it comes back to the cloud piece again. So the cloud does intensify this. And it comes down to the fact that when you move to the cloud, your data moves outside of your perimeter. So you have to sort of visualize that all these great data assets you have that are within your organizational perimeter. If you make a mistake, then worst thing that can happen is that, oh, I left this database open and now everyone in my organization can see that data. And that's not great, but it's okay because everybody within your perimeter is a trusted individual, so that's all right. When you start to move all these bits of data outside into the cloud, suddenly that same misconfiguration leaves that data open to everybody on the internet, and that's a very different proposition. So you have to be really careful with databases, with file sharing, with all of those pieces, even collaboration, because it's now outside your perimeter, and you have to allow staff to access this data. There's no point setting up a database, applying all these great security controls to it in terms of access permissions and encryption, and then preventing your users accessing it. They just can't leverage the value that's in there. So at the end of the day, the user has to be able to get access to that data. And that's what the attackers are using. Because if they can steal your credentials, steal your identity, they'll sail right past your encryption. They'll sail right past your access permissions, because you need to allow your users access to the data. They steal the identity, they have access to the data. So it becomes really difficult. And this is why we talk about staff becoming the new enterprise perimeter, because that's really what it is. We've put all these firewalls in place and these different ways of technology keeping the bad guys out. But now the bad guys can steal the identities of a user who could be anywhere, working from home, working on the road, and they can still access the data. And so that's the problem now, is that using social engineering to steal identities just gives them straight access to the data, and they can monetize that and use that for their own profit and against you as an organization.
How would you define people-centric security?
Fundamentally, it comes down to this. A security manager will look at their organization and they will say, right, I have my firewalls, I have my intrusion detection, I have my anti-malware, I have my backup, I have all of these different controls that are in place. And these take a lot of feeding and watering, a lot of configuration to make sure they're secure and that they're working properly. And as I said, it's quite effective. It works pretty well. That's not how the attacker looks at your organization. The attacker doesn't look at anything like that anymore. The attacker realizes that control is pretty effective, and so there's no point bashing my head against it or pulling out zero-day exploits to try and get in. What I'll do is I'll just look at the people who use this technology. And so they will look at LinkedIn and Google and Facebook to do their research rather than trying to sort of scan all your firewalls. They will try and identify the people in your organization who perhaps have got access to critical data, whether that's the CEO or the CEO's PA, whether that's the head of marketing, whether it's the head of research. It depends. It can depend on your organization who they will target, but they will target people and they will start to use all these social engineering attacks against them, because if they can steal the identity, then they can access the data. And so this is the fundamental shift, really, that your protectors and your defenders of the organizations tend to look at your enterprise from a technology perspective, and the attackers tend to look at it from a human perspective. And this is the people-centric security that we now need to pivot to. We need organizations to realize that actually the defenders need to think about people-centric security too. How do I defend the identities of my organization, of my staff? How do I ensure that I know what they're doing? How do I ensure that those accounts haven't been compromised and are being used? How do I find out who my very attacked people are? Not just my very important people, but my very attacked people, the people who've got the privileges, the people who perhaps do click a bit too much on emails and open too many attachments. Yeah. How do I find that? And that's what the people-centric story is about. It's about ensuring that the defenders start to think about protecting the people, because that's the new perimeter.
How would you advise that CISOs do take a people-centric security approach?
I think there's a sort of a maturity journey to it, but I think initially you have to think that more than 99% of attacks now require human interaction. It's not just a case of burrowing through your firewall and accessing your organization. The attackers need someone to do something, to click on a link, to open an attachment, to pay an invoice. So you have to realize that there's a huge part that your staff can play in defending your organization. So I think the journey really is for an organization to focus on people-centric, is to start initially thinking about email, because email is where the vast majority of these threats come from. So 94% of attacks come via email. So stop all the attacks coming in via email. That's number one. If you can clean up and put hygiene in place at your perimeter so only good emails get through and you've got enough controls in place to manage those, then that's going to be a massive step forward. Mm-hmm. I think the second big step to take really is about educating your staff. And this is not just about security awareness. I've spoken many times about how security awareness will fail, and it does. I think the example I commonly use is smoking. A pack of cigarettes has "smoking will kill you" written on the side, and so everybody who buys cigarettes knows the dangers involved. 100% awareness, and yet still people smoke. It's not about just awareness. It's not about security awareness. It's about behavior. How do you pivot even further past awareness to make people change their behavior, to do something different, to not click on the link, to not open the attachments, to report suspicious emails? So it really is about going beyond just having a security awareness campaign, but that's the second major fundamental deliverable that you need to have here. Mm-hmm. And then the final piece of that maturity journey really is about protecting the data. So wherever that data happens to be, on premise or on the cloud, how do you protect that data? How do you stop it leaking out? So data leak prevention would be one tool that you would use. Usage analysis to look at the ways that your staff are using that data. Insider threat management to see if people are acting maliciously or even in error, they're accessing data that they haven't done before. So you can start to keep an eye on the data as well. So that's the path forward for that people-centric view. It really is first clean up the email, get good email hygiene in place, train your staff and change their behavior and the culture of the organization, and then start to focus on protecting that data wherever it happens to be.
And how can CISOs instill a security culture in their organization?
Oh, that's a very challenging question. We could talk for hours just about this very topic. There's many aspects to this, but I think it starts off with, I know it's a cliche, but buy-in from the top. You know, if your CEO isn't representing good security behavior, then nobody else will. At one of my organizations, we did some analysis about what was the biggest influencer on on a user's understanding and propensity for following the security awareness steps. And it really was about whether their line manager took it seriously or not. So if you can get your line managers to take it seriously, the staff will take it seriously. So that's one of the key things, is making sure that you cascade down the fact that, yes, we take it seriously as an enterprise. And then it's about communication. It's about communicating all the right things to do. It's about communicating why it's important and the impact that can happen if you don't follow it. And it's about reinforcing that with continual drip feed communication and triggers around the organization to remind people to do the right thing. People want to do the right thing, but they often focus on just doing the job and being as effective as they can at the job. And sometimes that will deviate from security best practice. So you need to keep on bringing them back to doing the right thing and remembering the messages you've instilled in them by having triggers around the place, whether that's a button in your Outlook client that reminds you to report phishing emails, whether that's a poster on a wall. There's different ways of doing those triggers, but communication, exec buy-in, and then sort of continual feedback and continual reinforcement of the message is the way to slowly turn that ship around and build that security culture.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the more you see something, the more you start to believe it. So if you do have that sort of approach in your organisation, then it's just going to instill into people's minds a little bit more. And it's something that, it's like a reminder, I guess.
It is, but you need to make sure they take it seriously. And if you think about credit card fraud, actually people are protected from the impact of that. So if your credit card gets duplicated, your bank tends to write to you and says, "Yeah, sorry about that. Here's a new credit card. We've written off that debt that was instilled by the attacker." So people don't really feel the impact of it. And I think where people do feel the impact, they take it a lot more seriously. And so we have to make sure that people understand that security has an impact on your organization and can have an impact on you as an individual. If we can just make people understand that and see themselves in those different scenarios that we see in the press, then actually they'll take it a lot more seriously. And it's not just about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is something that many security professionals have talked about. It's about putting real examples forward and helping people see themselves in those examples and see their organizations and understand what it could mean for them. That then helps with that motivation piece of that, and that helps that behavior change rather than just awareness.